Colm is the Community Development Officer at Age Scotland, and he's going to be telling us a bit about finding funding opportunities and identifying your group or project story. So Colm, if you're happy to get started, that would be fab. I think Maisie will get the presentation shared for us.
Hello everybody, thank you very much. I'm really glad to be the first up from the important bits, as Maisie as Lottie just described. So my name is Colm, and I am, as it says there, I'm the community development officer at Age Scotland. There are many of us, but I work in the About Dementia team, which is partly why I'm here today. And it would be remiss of me not to mention the fact that my main job at Age Scotland is running a new network called the Scottish Dementia Friendly Communities Network. So before I leave here today, I'm going to be very cheeky and put a link into the chat to basically invite you and all of your friends and anybody who runs a dementia choir or a singing group to consider maybe joining the Dementia Friendly Communities Network. Plug over, I should also say that I have been very, very fortunate. I've worked for a number of funders over the last few years. I've worked for the National Lottery Community Fund, and you'll be hearing from Paul in a bit, but I've also worked for some other funders, including the Life Changes Trust, that basically distributed over £20 million worth of National Lottery Community Fund funding for dementia projects in Scotland. And for what it's worth, I'm on the board of a charity in Glasgow called Toonspeak, which is a young people's theatre company. So I am very, very sympathetic to you all for having to apply funding and get money and beg and borrow and scrape money to keep doing what you want to do. So I do understand. If we could go to the next slide, I will stop my waffle and actually get on to the slightly more useful information, and I hope this is useful to you. Some of you will already know all this. I don't think I'm gonna sort of present anything that's earth-shattering today, but although I'm going to concentrate on funding from funders, trusts and foundations, always remember that there are other ways where you could get money for your choir or your group. So I'm going to be concentrating on grants from funders, trusts and foundations, but always at the same time, look to see what you can do about sponsorship, individual donations, appeals, sales. So I'll talk about those at the end. But the main thing that I'm going to concentrate on is the thing that everybody loves to do, is to sit down and fill in funding applications. The next slide has probably the most important web link that I can give to you. I did joke, I've got 20 minutes to talk. Maybe I should just spend 20 minutes saying to people, funding Scotland, funding Scotland, funding Scotland for 20 minutes. The www.funding.scot website is the best one-stop shop resource in Scotland. You may already be aware of it, and you may already be thinking, oh, I've tried that and it's not much use. But for those of you who haven't or are not familiar with it, it is a website that is updated almost on a daily basis by the Scottish Council of Voluntary Organisations, and it is literally a one-stop shop for funding. It has everything from very, very small family trusts that maybe only offer grants of £500 or £1,000 to the big guns, you know, those funders that offer multi-year £1 million grants. So if you haven't been on it, it is a website that you need to register, but that only takes a minute or two. And there are literally, at any time you go on, there are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of funders at any time. Please don't be alarmed. There are filters in there, And when you register, you can quickly filter through all of those things. So if you're one of the lucky people whose task it is to try and bring money into your group or your choir, and maybe all you need is just £1,000 just to kind of cover travel or expenses or something like that, there will be something on here for you. If you're looking at putting on a performance, if you're looking at really taking your group to another level, and you're looking for something in the region of £10,000 or more, there is something here for you as well. So do have a look at it. Once the quick registration's out of the way, and then you can spend time just getting used to it. It's updated on an almost daily basis, and it is the best one-stop shop. Creative Scotland is basically they get their funding primarily through the Scottish Government and then the National Lottery. I've put it down here at the top of this list because it's worthwhile keeping an eye on them. You'll find yourselves, if you're a small choir or a small community group, there may not be very much on offer from Creative Scotland, but they're always worth having a look at just to see. You will know better than anybody the rise in profile of dementia inclusive choirs and singing groups and community singing over the last 5 years in particular. And funders are usually quite responsive to things like this. So if you keep checking in at Creative Scotland and there's nothing there for you, it is always worthwhile checking in, because they could launch one-off funding programs. Most of their funding that is applicable to you will be distributed through Awards for All, which is an exceptional small grants program distributed by the National Lottery Community Fund. But I'm not going to steal any of Paul's thunder. Paul can tell you everything about Awards for All later on in the talk. But Creative Scotland and the National Lottery Community Fund work together to offer these very accessible, very helpful, valuable grants that I would always recommend you looking for. If you've never had a grant before, both Awards for All and on the opportunities on Funding Scotland will hopefully put you at ease. Just because you've never had a grant before, it doesn't mean that you can get a grant at some point. So please don't be put off by things like a lot of guidance or a long application form. If you need money, then this is one of the ways that you can kind of go about it. So don't be put off by something too quickly, is my advice. One of the things that I would also say to you, as if you're a small community-based choir singing group, always look regularly for funding throughout the UK. Funding Scotland is by its nature Scotland limited within Scotland, but at any given time there could be small grants out there for groups from UK-wide funders. So it's always having a little look in the search engine of your choice just to keep an eye on what's out there. Sometimes they're very, very short turnaround times, so it's always maybe just looking in once a month, once a week, and just kind of keeping an eye and kind of seeing what's out there. Some general advice now about funding, particularly those of you who are not experienced in filling in application forms or don't like filling in application forms, and who does like filling in application forms. One of the things that I would say is, if it is possible to pick up the phone or send an email and have a little bit of communication for the funder just before you apply, it can save an awful lot of time for you as the applicant and for the funder. If you just kind of have a little chat with them. Usually with these things, you know, it can only take 4 or 5 minutes. You could avoid spending a long time on an application form and realizing that you're not applicable, or that you don't have the right paperwork, or that something else has come up and you've put a lot of effort into an application and you just may not be a fit for that funding program. So if possible, it's always worthwhile picking up the phone and just kind of having a chat with someone. And most funders are very, very happy to do that. I've wrote down here, applications can be time consuming, especially if you're volunteers. Applications are time consuming. There's no getting around it. Some of them are easier than others. Despite all the criticism that funders get, most funders don't want to make it difficult for applicants, and most funders don't want to ask you for information that they don't need or that will add to their workload. So if they're asking for information, the likelihood is that it is important, but they can be very, very time consuming. I'm sympathetic towards that, especially if you are a small community group that doesn't have somebody that can do this, either as a volunteer or paid, that has the time to sit and do this all day, every day. They're very, very time consuming. But when you get that grant, when you get that funding, it makes it all worthwhile. Success rates will differ between different funding programs, but what I would say is that I'll come on to a little bit of advice later on about what to do if you don't get funding from an application. Please don't be disheartened, but it's always important to keep copies of the applications that you have, because there will be important bits that you've put into an application that can be reused and recycled and updated and strengthened for further funding opportunities later on. So nothing goes to waste. And for anybody who is filling funding applications on behalf of a group, it's always worthwhile hanging on to everything that you have written. The next slide, please, thank you very much, is some of this is going to sound a little bit corny, but it's simply because I realize that most funders are dealing with groups and organizations that have considerably higher incomes than the people on this call today or anybody watching this. There's going to be a lot more experience. There's going to be a lot more time to give to this. So a lot of this is really just to encourage you to think about your group, your choir. Realize that there are many organizations like you out there in Scotland at the minute, but you are your own group. You have your own identity, and it's made up of all the individual people that are part of your group. Everybody who's singing, everybody who does all this sort of administration. You are one of very many similar organizations, but you are unique. You have your own identity. And so my advice would be, although funding is competitive, don't be afraid to tell your story. And in fact, do tell your story to stand out. And I'll talk a little bit more right at the very end about, what it is about you that can make your group a little bit different. There's been a shift in funding over the last kind of 15, 20 years, I think, where funding has moved from addressing bad things to putting the focus on what grant holders and groups can do to make things better. So I would say to you to look at your group, your choir, and focus on the positive benefits and the assets and the resources that you have within your community. That will strengthen your application rather than listing the things that are bad, and listing the things that maybe need addressing. Yours is a very, very positive resource that you have, and that should be a big part of your application. About no matter how much money you're looking for from a funder or from anybody else, you have a very positive resource, and that's what you should concentrate on. Show how the funding will make your group even better. And I've put it there. I was going to take this out, but I've left this in: is be honest and be proud. Funders won't want you exaggerating in your funding applications, and they certainly won't want you telling lies. But be honest. and be proud of what you're doing or what you want to do and what all the people in your group are doing. And that's a big part of showing off why a funder or anybody that gives their money to you sees it as a positive investment. A little couple of points here about need. Talking there about funding moving from addressing need, addressing bad things, addressing problems to making things better. Need matters more to some funders than others. So just to reinforce that point is that if you want to apply for funding from someone and they've asked for evidence of need, or you feel that you need to make an argument about why this money is needed and not just wanted, always balance it out with all the positive stuff that you're going to do with it and how it is actually going to make an impact on people's lives. I've put down here short case studies and stories and things like that, always with people's permission. It's very, very important that even if people have given permission to maybe anonymize these things in application forms, just so that people can't be identified. But short case studies and personal stories, most of the time, are valuable than statistics. A lot of funders won't necessarily be convinced to give you money if you sort of quote a lot of kind of detail from the Scottish Index of Multiple Deprivation or something like that, or statistics that don't mean very much. But those stories, if you are going to quote some statistics, maybe try and keep them kind of personal to your group, to your choir. But the case studies and the stories are part of you telling your story and about why the money will make such a difference to the people and the communities that you're working with. And just some final points here that certainly Paul will definitely pick up on later on as well, is that if you are contacted by a funder, please don't be scared. It's regular for people to be contacted. It's usually just to check something out. If it's a formal assessment, then they're not out to trap you or trick you. It's usually just clarification so that they can prepare their assessment reports for judgment by the assessment committee. So please don't be scared by that. Don't be disheartened by unsuccessful applications. All of us that have ever worked in funding are usually the quickest to say, it's great giving money out, but more often than not, you're saying no to people. So from an applicant's point of view, please don't be disheartened by unsuccessful applications, and always ask for feedback as well. A lot of funders will give standard feedback, but don't be afraid to maybe kind of drop an email and say, look, could we just have a little chat just to make sure, because it will improve your applications to other funders. I've only got a couple of minutes left, so if we could bring up the last slide, I just want to mention to you, so as part of your story about what makes your group and your choir really, really special and different, ties in with the other areas from which you can get money. So we're thinking here about maybe corporate sponsorship, individual donations, appeals to a local or a national community. Have a look and see if there's anything that you can do when if you perform publicly. If you can sell CDs, t-shirts, pencils, go for it, because it's part of your identity, it's part of your branding. And that's my point about community. Most choirs and singing groups, I think, operate within their own local community and maybe a little bit further afield, and that's your home. And you should think about how you can keep that presence and make yourself known in the local community. And I put in there community of interest as well, because it's very important if you do get the opportunity to work with other singing groups and to work with other choirs. Collaboration is sometimes better than competition. So if you do have opportunities to go to performances or to put in joint funding applications, that's worth exploring. as you have your identity and you try and make yourself known in the local community and beyond, these are the relationships that you have on an ongoing basis with individuals, businesses, and individual supporters. So these, if you have a formal board of trustees, or if you maybe just have your volunteers, they join together with all the people that are in the choir and all your supporters, and those local relationships can really lead to great things. You could be surprised as to how much income you could generate just by people knowing who you are and by having normal personal conversations with them. I've made the point about it's your group and it's your story, and ultimately with every funding application that you fill in, or everybody that you ask, would you maybe consider making a donation, it always comes back to why you do what you do, and that is just the joy of singing, the joy of being with other people in a community singing group. That is 2:30 on the dot. So thank you very much for Maisie for going through those slides so quickly. I'm going to shut up, and I'm going to invite somebody else to kind of step in now. So thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Colin. That was really, really interesting. So many great points for people to take on board. And I think the biggest thing I'm taking away from that is just for us all to make sure that we're representing that identity and not being afraid to tell your story. So that's brilliant. Thank you. So we will take questions, but we're going to take questions after all three presentations, everybody. So without further ado, I'm going to invite Alison Reeves, who is Deputy CEO and Manager of Making Music in Scotland. And she's going to be talking to us about writing budgets, our favourite thing, preparing for evaluation and reporting. So Alison, if you're happy to get started, that'd be brilliant.
Yes, thank you very much, Lottie, and good afternoon, everybody. And as Lottie said, I'm from Making Music, which is a membership association. It's the membership association for groups that of people that make music in their leisure time. So that's, we used to call amateur or non-professional groups. We like the phrase leisure time music makers, but leisure time music makers could be anybody. It could be people singing in a choir or a singing group like the ones that you are here representing today, or some of our members are as large as 150-piece orchestral societies, and including Glasgow Orchestral Society, 150 years old this year. So as you can imagine, we've got a lot of different types of organisations, lots of different needs that we guide and support. And this is, I brought to you today some of our slides from the funding presentation that we deliver for our members. I'm really trying to focus it down on the things that are going to be more relevant to groups of the size that you're working with. So I apologise a bit if there's some things that seem a bit unwieldy. But really what I wanted to bring to you today were some of the practical things that you might come up against when you're making an application, from the point of the groups that make those applications. And I have filled in many funding applications in my time, from tiny little community grants funds right up to big Creative Scotland applications. So this is just some of the things that we thought were useful to tell you about the practicalities of making those applications. So first of all, about budgets. With every application you submit, you're going to have to submit a budget. And now sometimes they are in a structured format. So it might be an actual spreadsheet that you're asked to fill in, something online, or sometimes funders will ask you just to submit a budget in your own format, whichever the way that you want to do it, they ask you to do it. And the thing to remember about a budget is that it's not just something that a funder is asking you to do. It's something that if you do really well is going to be really, really important and useful to the success of your project. So it's really worth taking the time to do this well, not just so that you can get that funding, but so that you can make sure that your project is properly costed and ultimately successful. So just some tips when you're thinking about a budget, and then I've got a sample one for you to have a wee look at in a second. Make sure you're balancing income and expenditure. Now might sound like a really obvious thing, but in every budget you're going to have to put in what money is coming in, which will include the funding that you're asking for, and how much you're going to be spending, what the costs are going to be. For a funder, they need to see a zero at the end of that, and they don't want you to be making a profit, basically. And some organisations, especially charities, might think, oh, it's a way of building up our reserves, for example, keeping a bit back for running something else. But for a project budget, you want that to be a zero at the end. When you are breaking down your expenditure and your costs, you should be itemising those costs. And I've said within reason, because it doesn't need to be tiny, tiny detail. For example, you might break down the fee for the singing leader to show the rate that you're paying that singing leader, how many hours that they're going to be working for. And I'll show you what that looks like in the next slide. If there's a very large cost, for example, it might be a cost for publicity for the project, and you would want to break that down to show what exactly that would be. So it might be how many flyers you're going to print, any cost of social media adverts, that type of thing. That would need to be broken down a little bit, so there's not just like one large cost in there. When you're estimating costs, which inevitably you will be doing, you're not going to know exactly how much everything is going to cost. Just be careful that you're being accurate with that. You can base it on previous costs. So if you've already paid a singing leader, or it's the same singing leader you normally pay, then that's fine to use that. Or you can do some research and request some estimates. For example, if you are going to buy a piece of equipment, and a good look around on Amazon or whatever other shop you might use for that, then just make sure those estimates are really accurate. I've put in here something about fair work principles. So Creative Scotland, if you do make an application to them, are now asking applicants that they stick to these fair work principles, which is just making sure that the professional artists that you work with are paid at an appropriate rate. And there's some more detail on that on Creative Scotland's own website. But it's really an important principle just to apply across the board. No funder wants to be seeing an application where people are being underpaid, and it's important that those professionals are properly recompensed for their work. Make sure you show any other income. So Colin has some good suggestions there of other places that income can come from. And so if you might be, for example, going to make a CD and sell it at the end, then there might be some income from that. And a lot of our groups, they have concerts with ticket sales or donations at the door. So you might be able to show some other income from that. But also in-kind donations. So in-kind basically means anything that is given to your project to be able to run that, which is not charged for. And one of the things I would suggest might be if you get a hall space for free, or if there's a space that you might normally have to rent, but you don't have to pay for it, then that could go in as an in-kind donation. And funders really like to see if there is another way that you're going to financially support the project. And that's a perfectly good way to show that. So I'll show you how that might look in a minute. And good practice if you're putting together a reasonably large budget is to include contingency. So contingency is that little pot of money for when things don't go quite to plan, when you might have to pay somebody additionally because somebody was unwell and you had to bring in somebody extra, or there's all kinds of things that can happen. So if you put an extra, usually about 5% of the whole project on the end, then that just can cover any of those unexpected expenditures. So, Lottie, can I see that? Oh, it's Maisie, isn't it? Can I see the next slide? Now, it might be quite small on your screen, but I'm sure you can get this slide afterwards and have a scrutiny of it. So I've used here a template from a community grants fund that's an actual little spreadsheet that you would be asked to fill in. And you can see some of the things that I talked about. So they've asked for the project costs, first of all, so that's the expenditure. So you can see how I've broken down the singing leader's fee as 6 sessions of £75, which is 1.5 hours per session at £50 an hour. And the reason for breaking it down, like I said, is then the funder can see that you're paying that singing leader appropriately, and that you know exactly how much time you're going to be asking them to spend. So that goes all the way through there. You can see that the room hire fee is broken down into 6 sessions as well, and exactly how much per hour, so they can see how much they're spending. And then I've got also some refreshments. Make sure you put in all those little bits of expenditure that you know that you're going to want to have. And all of those things are legitimate to ask for. In the additional funds for the project, that is any additional income that I was talking about. There is some tickets for from the concert. Now, I've said donation from Generous Choir because sometimes it helps if you can say that you have some of your own income somewhere that you are going to also put into it as well. So some groups do have some reserves, maybe from previous activity, and they might want to put some of that into this new activity. And again, funders like to see that you're putting something of your own in if you can afford to do that. And then at the bottom there's a 20% discount on room hire, which is what I've called the in-kind cost in this budget. So the kind hall has decided to reduce your rent by 20%, but you could say that that was an in-kind donation to this project. So it's just about telling that narrative that there's other ways of other types of income that are going to be supporting your activity. Thank you, Maisie. Can I see the next slide? Now, one of the things that groups often say to us is, we don't need new funding to do new things. We just want to keep doing what we're already doing. And it's a common question, and it's quite tricky to sell that to a funder. But also, it's not always a great plan going forward anyway, because if you can't find other ways of financially sustaining that activity, and when that funding runs out, then that's a bit challenging. So if you're an existing group and you've got some other ways of supporting that, if it's people paying a little bit of money, or if it's the organisation that you're attached to somehow financially supporting that, then that's fantastic. So this slide really is to show you, though, that you should build in your regular costs when you're making this project financial plan as well. So here's an example. So if you were applying for new activity to add to an existing group, so if, for example, you were an existing choir and you wanted to bring 10 new people in, so that could be bringing people that we're talking about today, people with dementia and their and other people that you want to bring in, then you could apply for the cost of their membership fees, and any other direct costs that you might incur, like disclosure checks. But you could also apply for a portion of your regular costs that you would be already covering in your activity. So if those 10 people were a quarter of the choir, you could put in a quarter of the choir leader's time that term, or a quarter of your venue costs that term. It's called full cost recovery principle, and I'm not going to talk any more about it because it's only applicable to certain groups. And Paul, you'll notice that I've referenced the National Lottery Community Fund here because it's a really good description of what full cost recovery means. Okay, I'm getting into quite a lot of detail here, so I'm going to move on a wee bit. Just to be aware, financial documents are likely to be asked for. If you've said that you have other funding, then it's likely they'll ask you for the details of that. Sometimes that's just a letter. Your last year's accounts it's very common for you to be asked that, so that you can show how you're already operating. Bank statements, and that's usually just to check your account details for fraud checks. Sometimes if you are part of it, a bigger group, they might ask for a whole or an annual budget so that they can see how this extra activity is going to add into that. That's only for larger groups. And again, for larger groups, they might ask you for a cash flow if you're asking for some funds that are going to be staggered, where the payments are going to be staggered across a couple of years period. Again, that's probably mostly for larger groups. Right, that is enough about money. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about something else that funders often ask you to do, which is set outcomes in your application. So you'll often see a box that says, tell us what you will achieve or what will your outcomes be as a result of this activity. And again, like I said, with the budget, setting the outcomes for a project is really useful for you when you're project planning, not just for applying for funding, but so that you can be really clear what it is that you're trying to achieve and make sure that as you're going forward, that you are staying on track to achieve those things. So it's not a bad thing to take the time to do anyway. And it can seem a bit overwhelming and a bit management speaky, but I've got a little example here of how it might end up looking in your application. So if you set outcomes by these SMART targets, which you might have heard of before, that are specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time related. And I'll read out the example that I have got for you here. This is actually for a music group that would be working with young people, so I didn't have time to change it for you. So if you had a project which was masterclasses for young people in a concert band, you could say that 16 young people will demonstrate improved instrumental and sight reading skills at the end of the masterclasses, and 12 out of the 16 will begin regularly attending weekly senior band rehearsals in autumn 2023. So you can see I've already got something that's quite specific. There's a specific amount of people. It's measurable because I can count the number of people that do in the end get involved. All of that has to be achievable. So don't be too concerned about being very ambitious, because that's what the funder wants you to be. You have to set a target that's actually achievable for you. And time related as well, we've got in there because I've said that, I want this to happen by the end of a certain amount of time. There is another link down in the corner of this slide, which we can sure send on, which is Evaluation Support Scotland's guidance on setting outcomes. So that goes into this in a lot more detail. And hopefully it's not too daunting for you. But if you get that bit right, then it's quite easy to do the next bit, which is the evaluation part. So if you want to show at the end of the project what you've achieved, then you can look for these two types of data to collect. Quantitative, that's the fancy word for numbers. So that would be your 16 young people in this example. But like Colin was saying, the stories of what you've achieved are really, really fundamental these days. Funders really want to know about what has happened. So collecting those stories about what has happened is actually usually more important and can be a bit time consuming, but definitely worth doing. I think we'll just move on because I'm just aware of the time, Lottie. So other things that you might be asked for, just to get those ready. If you've got a constitution or another governing document, if that's how you're organised, then they will ask for that. If there's any relevant policies, so often they're going to ask groups like yours for safeguarding policies, equality, diversity and inclusion policy, if you have one of those. I'm skipping the marketing plan, and CVs of key personnel. Sometimes they might ask you about the specific people delivering the activity, like your singing leader. And if you've got any letters or statements of support, then that could be really useful as well. So any organisation you've previously worked with or the ones that you have agreed to work with you already, then that's great if you can have something written about that. Thanks, Maisie. Okay, so after you've submitted, all of this detail, a couple of practical things to think about. Always check for the acknowledgement of the application. and that's just a one that sounds obvious, but sometimes is the biggest disaster if you think you've clicked that button and it hasn't gone through. But if things change before you know that the application is going to be reviewed for your project, it's not a bad idea to let the funder know about that as well. So if you know, if something in your planning changes, you can still let them know about that usually. Check you know what the grant conditions are, and if there are things like acknowledgement requirements like logos that you need to attach. So you would want to know that ahead of starting a project so that you're prepared and ready for it. And then you can schedule things like your start and your end dates, and evaluation dates as well, making sure you're scheduling those in as well, and any dates where the balance payments, so if you're only being paid some of the funding up front and some of it's coming in later, make sure you know the dates of all of those things. It seems again quite daunting for volunteers to do, but if you have a look at this next slide, Lottie, then if you can allocate the tasks at the beginning of the project, things that you know that you're going to need to do going through the project to keep in touch with the funder and then report to the funder, try and share them out fairly. And if you collect material as you go that you know you're going to need to report back, store it in one place. So maybe you have one shared folder that everybody who is involved in the project can put things like photos, any publicity or marketing material, feedback forms that you've collected, the data on registers and that kind of thing, any finance reports. Just have, if you can make one place and every volunteer who or a member of your team who's collecting those things can pop it in the same place. And going back to the top of that list, make sure that the people who are going to need to fill in that report at the end know how the funder wants you to report and the dates that you're going to have to do that by. And remember to always say thank you very much to the funder, because some of them ask you to fill in an end of project report and some don't. So we know that there's some trusts and foundations who just give out money and don't actually ask for much in a way of report at the end, but it's really a good idea just to send them a note at the end of your project and say thank you very much, partly because you might want to ask for funding again, but also because some of those trusts and foundations are also managed by volunteers, so it's nice to say thank you. I think that's all my slides, Lottie. I keep saying that's Lottie, right. But I think it's Maisie changing them.
It's Maisie doing the hard
so thank you. There's a lot of detail in there, so sorry for rattling through it so fast.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much, Alison. There's so many like practical points there that we can all make use of, and actually like telling the story, but through numbers and through budgets is making me think, because you know you can really illustrate that, can't you? So that's fab. Thank you so much. So our next speaker is Paul Forrest, who is Funding Officer with Awards for All, which is part of the National Lottery Community Fund. And he's going to be talking about what an assessment panel looks for in a good application. So Paul, if you're happy to get going, that would be great.
Thanks, Lottie. Hi, everyone. As Lottie said, my name's Paul Forrest, and I'm a funding officer at the National Lottery Community Fund. Not just working on our small grants programme, National Lottery Award for All. I do cover all the programmes that we currently have in Scotland. So whether you're looking to apply to our Awards for All programme, which is our small grants, or if you're looking to apply for a larger pot of funding, such as Improving Lives, then possibly you may deal with me, because I do cover all of the programmes. Suppose it's probably best to sort of tell you how we operate at the National Lottery Community Fund in Scotland. We do work in a sort of place-based model, which really means that we have 8 area teams that cover all of Scotland. For me and my team, we're responsible for Glasgow. So if you're a Glasgow-based group and you're applying for funding, then it's likely that you'll be dealing with me or one of my colleagues in the Glasgow team. But don't worry, regardless of where you're based in Scotland, you will be able to speak to a funding officer that covers your area and someone that does know your area quite well. And in terms of what I'm going to cover today, obviously it's great to be here, and as Lottie's already said, that I will sort of go over what we look for in an application, not just us, but sort of some general funding guidance as well. Yeah, some of it will be sort of tailored towards your own funding, as well as that general funding advice. And as already been touched on already, I will sort of come on to one of our specific funding programmes, which is our Small Grants National Lottery Awards for All Scotland, which you may be familiar with already. Thanks, Macy. Oops. So yeah, so it's already been touched on already. I think Colin mentioned it earlier that most applications start with an idea, with your idea more importantly, and we do ask that if you're unsure, if you're a bit hesitant, then just get in touch. We're always happy to have a conversation. We'll give you the advice at that point, at that very initial stage, whether the funding is right for you. Obviously, all funders, they operate differently, but I would check. It is always worth that email or that phone call if you're able to get in touch with the funder and try and have a conversation at that early point. It's already been mentioned, but I would really like to reiterate that if it's going to save you that bit of time, if it's unlikely to be firstly eligible, but if it's unlikely to be a fit as well, then absolutely we will tell you that and we will save you your time. If it's likely to be a fit, we will absolutely give you guidance. We will try and support you, and give you that help to make sure that the process in applying is as simple as possible. In later slides, I'll come on to talk about what we look for in a good application, but I wanted to sort of the second bullet point there. I just wanted to really mention that about not just basing everything on the application. So absolutely, when you do apply, we will read over your application and your budget, but we don't just base our decision on that. We look at projects holistically, and I mean what I mean by that is that we will look at other things. So we'll look at things like your accounts or your finances. We'll look at your social media and your online website or any other online presence that you have. Look at your constitution as well. We'll look at local context, certainly at the National Lottery Community Fund, because we do work in that sort of place-based model. We will look at what other organisations are delivering locally or what other community groups are delivering. Is there a need for that specific or your project in that area? So we do look at things holistically and we don't just base our decision on the application. Moving on to the third bullet point, good governance. It's important that your organisation has good governance. What do I mean by that? Well, it's really just, governance is really just about the way your organisation is set up and it's run. We want to know about the procedures, the policies, the documents and the management arrangements that you have in place. We can ask you for things like your governing document, your latest accounts, bank statements. These all help us to really understand your governance. And obviously having relationships, good relationships with other organisations or even just internal relationships as well is important. And really demonstrating that to us can further demonstrate your governance to us. Why is this important? Well, we want to ensure that our money going to organisations, we want to ensure that organisations can effectively deliver their projects and really that it has the biggest impact on their and benefit to their community. If you don't have sort of adequate governance or if we do have concerns, then it might impact your chances of being funding. So it is useful or it is good practice to ensure that you're really thinking about your governance all the time. And then the last bullet point there about building on successful applications. So if your application is successful, obviously that's great, but it's no guaranteed that we'll fund you again year on year. We will expect you to really build on previous applications, developing your work, evidence in the development, and yeah, we would look for you to demonstrate that in future applications. So always thinking about how you can improve and develop. So I just wanted to come on and talk about sort of funding criteria. Some really simple tips I would like to sort of mention first. Really simple things like reading the funder's guidance, checking what their priorities are, and really just simply answering all the questions. But also, as it says there, my first bullet point, specifically look for any mention of programme aims, themes or outcomes. Now, I know Alison touched on sort of outcomes and setting outcomes, but this would be different, setting your own outcomes, but then looking at outcomes that maybe a funder set. Different funders say different things on their website or on their application form. Some may refer to it as sort of funder aims or programme aims. Others might refer to it as sort of funder or programme themes. Others might refer to it as funder or programme outcomes as well. So I would really encourage you to look out for them and check out what they are. And really then try and align and find one that best aligns with the project that you're delivering. So if I give a little example, so if you're thinking about isolation or loneliness, you might want the people you support, you obviously want to demonstrate the sort of isolation or loneliness they're experiencing. It could be as a result of dementia. As a result of that isolation and loneliness, you'll maybe want to run weekly singing classes that will combat the isolation that people face. By running the classes, people develop friendships, people feel more connected, and then have access to wider support networks should they need it. So that's just a very simple example of looking at a funder who has a theme, an aim or an outcome around isolation and loneliness, and then your project specifically aligning with it and demonstrating it in the application form. What I would be careful of is applying to multiple funders and really just copy and paste. And I think, again, Colm, you touched on it earlier about keeping and saving your work, keep saving the information in your applications. And absolutely, I think that is a good idea. But again, I would try and discourage you from just copying and pasting an application and submitting it to multiple funders, because again, every funder has different priorities and different criteria as well. So as I said, it's not a one size fits all. Every application is unique in its own right. Just wanted to come on to sort of talk a bit about community. This is really an important aspect of our funding, and I know other funders like this as well. It's important that you ask, it's important that you tell us about your community and you really identify what their needs are and really involve them in shaping services. Your community might be a sort of geographical community, or it might be a community of interest, such as supporting people with dementia. It also could be both. So you might support people with dementia, but it might specifically be those in the north of Glasgow, just as an example. Think about why you exist and why you're set up. What are you set up to do? Do you have the skills and experience to deliver? Does the activities reflect your constitution as well? So, for example, an organisation set up to run social activities is proposing to now provide mental health support. That's probably an example of a group or an organisation that's really steering away from what they're setting up to do. Who else is doing what as well? Thinking about your community, speaking to beneficiaries or people you support, also speaking to the wider community, including community organisations as well, identifying what other services are out there. As a funder, our funds are limited. We don't have the funds to sort of fund every project. So we want you to demonstrate and be aware of existing provision locally. What are others doing and how does your work complement that? It's important to do your research as well. If you're able to build your connections as an organisation, whether it be sort of voluntary groups, private sector, or even public sector as well, we want to know about those organisations you're working with, so please do mention them. And as I said before, we do work in a place-based model, so we are very familiar with other organisations and what they are doing as well. So it's likely that the sort of funding officer you're dealing with will likely have that good local knowledge. In terms of the next slide, I just wanted to make it specific to the application, and again, thinking about your community. So if you're demonstrating your community or ways to involve your community in an application form, we want to know about how you involve your community at an organisational level, but also a project level as well. The more you're able to demonstrate it, the stronger your application is likely to be. So as an example, at an organisational level, you may have lived experience on the board or on your committee. You may have people volunteering within your organisation, or it might be that you've got previous service users, previous participants progressing to become paid sessional staff, full-time staff, that type of thing. So obviously, if you're able to demonstrate sort of your community or the community are involved at different levels, such as your board, staff team, volunteer team, then obviously it's likely that your application may be stronger. And then we'll look at the project and how you involve your community at a project level as well. So as it says there, the design, the development and the delivery. Thought I'd just give some examples. So the design phase of a project, you're really consulting with your community, you're trying to design it, as I said there, a sort of consultation or really informal conversations, or even like surveys or questionnaires might be a good way to involve people in the design phase to really shape the project that you're applying for. And then we look at the development phase. So that might be week to week, that might be month to month, it could be year to year. Ways to involve people continuously to really tweak what's working well, what's not working well, and really continuing to shape the project based on the needs of the people you're supporting. A very simple example of that could be through focus groups. It could be end of session feedback, all of that sort of stuff are ways to demonstrate that you're involving people in the development of your project. And then we lastly have the delivery phase of the project, which is people leading, people delivering, those people that are benefiting from your project actually leading and delivering. That could be through them progressing to become volunteers, to even becoming staff, as we've mentioned earlier, but it might not be quite as formal as that. You might just look for people, or people might want to maybe just stand up in an odd session and maybe lead on a session, or they might have the skills and experience or the confidence, so they might stand up and offer maybe some peer support. All that sort of stuff sort of contributes to people leading and leading in the delivery phase of your project. And then I was just going to come on to sort of some general hints and tips, whether it be our funding or sort of some general funding hints and tips as well. But before I do, I probably should explain our process of applying, and it really just follows on from what Colm and Alison were saying earlier. After you submit an application to us, and obviously this is very specific to the National Lottery Community Fund, but we do work in a very relational way. So we will always get in touch with you to discuss your application further. We don't bite. We're always happy to have a chat with you. So I really would encourage you to well, obviously, first of all, get in touch with us before you apply. But then obviously, once you've submitted your application, to then take us up on the offer to discuss your application further. It's really beneficial for us to understand your group a little bit better, and also the work that you do, and that can really complement, that conversation can really complement the application that you've submitted. Don't be scared to speak to us. It's obviously people like myself that you will be dealing with, so it's honestly not as scary as it may seem. And obviously that's your chance to really ask questions as well, if you have any specific questions you would like to ask as well. So I certainly would encourage it if you do wish to apply to your funding specifically. So then I was just going to go on to those sort of general hints and tips, and as it says there, start with your project or activity and then find the funds that fit. So don't start with a funder and then try to come up with a project that fits. As the next slide says, Maisie, don't force it. So if you force your project to fit a fund or even several funders, then you end up diluting what you want to do. So what I would say is, have your project in mind, but then find a funder that best fits the project that you're applying for. As I said there, you end up diluting, you end up sort of causing mission drift and sort of steering away from what you're originally set up to do. It ends up being difficult to really manage your project. It becomes more difficult to report on the grant as well if you end up trying to just make your project fit that funder. And always just encourage you to stay true to your project and find the best possible funder. So perhaps we are not the best funder for your project, but don't worry, because as if you do go to a sort of website like Funding Scotland, I'm sure you will be able to find a sort of funder that does suit your work and your project. Very, very simple, but same across all funders. Please do read your application carefully before you submit. As it says there, up to 55% of applications we receive are either incomplete or do sort of contain errors. So just have a read over before you apply. Really just have a check over it. Give it to someone else to have a read over it. And also, again, check eligibility. Are you even eligible to apply? That is the very first thing. So please do read our guidance or any other funder's guidance and make sure you're eligible to apply. If you're unsure, as always, just please phone someone, get in touch, make sure you're eligible to apply, make sure that everything's in order before then you start writing that application form. So tell us about what will happen because the specific fund or the specific money you're applying for, rather than really telling us about lots about your organisation. Some in the past, if you really think of it as a percentage, I've seen some organisations or some community groups applying to us in the past, and about 80% of their application is all about the organisation and the history and what they've done to date, and then 20% is about the actual project and the impact that they want to make. But actually, I would flip that on its head. 80% of your application should be about your project and the impact and what you want to achieve, and maybe 20%, absolutely, we do want to know a little bit about your organisation and its background and its history, but again, just make it very minimal, and again, about 20% is probably a fair proportion there. Yeah, sorry, I've sort of covered everything I want to. So yeah, as it says there, be concise. Get good at being concise. Obviously, if it's your first application, don't worry, it will obviously improve with the more practice that you do get. If you can really start with a very concise summary, then that's really helpful for us to get an initial idea of what you're looking to apply for. And it even may be that some of that initial summary as well we can use when either writing in a report or giving that information onto decision-making panels. Again, try and not waffle, it's very simple, but try and stick to the project that you're applying for, and try and stick obviously to the word count as well. Certainly at the National Lottery Community Fund, our application form is word limited as well. And if there's not enough characters or not enough space for you to complete all the information that you're looking for, don't worry, because as I said, most funders will allow you to provide additional information. Certainly with us, we'll allow you to provide that information in an email, or we'll just always follow up with a conversation. So it's always fine if you don't get everything on the application form. Buzzwords, try and avoid that. What we always say is don't overcomplicate things. Please use simple English. It's obviously people like myself that will be reading your application form. There is no magic formula. There is no magic buzzwords. There is no magic terminology. Just tell us in plain English, in simple form, what you want to do, what you want to achieve, and the impact that you're looking to make. And that's as simple as it can be, really. Some groups think that there is magic buzzwords or magic words that or terminology that you need to use, but it's absolutely not the case. We just want to know in simple English, because as I said, it's people like me reading your application form. Yeah, that's pretty much it from that slide. Using the what, the how, the who, the where, the when, and the why. This is essentially what we want to know in your application form. So what do you want to do? How will you do it? Who are the people involved, i.e. your beneficiaries? Where are you delivering your activity? When is it happening, and why are you doing it? So that's kind of what we want to know in your application as a very bare minimum. We want to obviously know about the difference your activities will have on your community. And again, thinking about those aims, those themes, those outcomes that I mentioned at the beginning, how does the difference that you want to make closely link with those aims, themes, outcomes that I mentioned earlier? As I've already said a couple of times, we don't bite. Please don't. Sorry, I'm just checking the time. I'm slightly over time. Apologies. I'll quickly finish up. But yeah, don't worry about contacting us. Please do. I always would encourage it. And as most other funders are happy to speak to you as well. We just think of us as a funder with this money. Our job is to give it away. So it's not like we're trying to hold back on dishing out funding at all. It's there to fund projects, so we're always encouraged when organisations want to speak to us. Just before you submit the application, again, just a little tidy up and a check before you do submit. Just making sure the sort of organisation is the name, the same name in all documents. So it could be that I'm trying to think of an example, but it could be that your organisation has its legal name or its full name, but you might use a shorter version, or you might it might be that you're known as, or you're trading as a sort of slightly different name. But certainly when you're applying to us, please ensure that the name is the same across all your documents, and normally always go by your sort of legal name. Yeah, if you've obviously got any issues or you've maybe worried about that, as always, just please do get in touch, and make sure that obviously there's always a main contact and someone that we can always get in touch with. Obviously making sure that their contact details are accurate and up to date as well, because it's important if we want to get in touch with any questions, we do have all that information is correct and accurate. Very quickly, forgot I had these couple of slides. Just wanted to quickly talk about National Lottery Awards for All, guys. Obviously, it's our small grants programme, and probably a fund that I'd probably steer you to in the first instance if you're new to funding. If you've never applied to us before, you're relatively new, or you're inexperienced with grant funding, you may want to consider this programme, which, as it says there, it's you can apply for anywhere between £300 up to £10,000 over a 12-month period. We can really fund loads within this funding programme, and is ideal if you're looking to deliver a pilot project, just simply bring people together or address a specific issue. So if you're just starting out applying to funding for the first time, then please do consider this application. And then just really wanted to quickly talk about our own programme aims, themes or outcomes, as I've mentioned earlier. We want you to, within this programme, we want you to demonstrate one of three things. I should really highlight one of three, because it doesn't need to be all three, just one of those. Meet it and meet it well, that's all we ask. First one is bring people together and build strong relationships and across communities. So a really perfect or a good example of that might be bringing, say, youth clubs or youth groups together over several months to design and plan an event. So that might be a good way of bringing people together. Second one is improving a place or a space that matters to a community. An example of that might be a community cleanup, followed by some gardening sessions around a key community venue. So it's a space and a place that's really key to that specific community. And then the final one is help more people reach their potential by supporting them at the earliest possible stage. An example might be language classes for young people whose first language isn't English. That's just three very simple examples. I would say that if it's a singing group that's supporting people with dementia, there's potential that it meets the first one of bringing people together, and potentially even the third one as well, of helping more people reach their potential. It obviously depends on what the project is and what the support will that you hope to provide for people in that project. But just as a just very simply, I would say that without limited information, there's potential that it meets sort of outcome one and three there. If you feel that it does, sorry, just to go back a little bit, Macy, if you feel that it does meet one of those three, then I think it's worth considering applying to us. And it's a very simple process to apply. It's an online application. Just Google National Lottery Awards for All Scotland, and you can find the application form there. As I've said already, if you do have any questions, then feel free to get in touch. The funder says no, don't take it too personally. We always give feedback, certainly at the National Lottery Community Fund. We would always give you verbal feedback by phone call and then written feedback as well. So it's not the end of the road if you're unsuccessful. After some feedback, if you're able to address that, then can you apply again? Can you build on what you've previously applied for? Can you build on that feedback that we've given as well? So we would always encourage you, if you're able to take on that feedback, then we would always encourage you to apply again. And then just a couple of slides here, really just linking you to, firstly, our blog, which has the latest news on our funds and latest news and all that. So if you want the latest information at the National Lottery Community Fund, please yes, please find us on, or please look at our blog. And then the next slide there will be our monthly newsletter about hints and tips and very similar information as well. So you might want to sort of sign up to our monthly newsletter as well. And yeah, I think that's pretty much me. Apologies, I've kind of overran a little bit, but yeah, thanks. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Paul. That's great. Loads and loads of stuff in there for us to dig into. So that's fab. And thank you so much to Colm, Alison as well for your presentations. It's really, really interesting. So we've got a bit of time for questions. I'm sure there's probably lots of things you've all thought about. There's two ways you can raise a question. You can use the raise hand function, which is at the bottom of your screen under reactions, and it just says raise hand. So you can use that. But you can also drop things into the chat if you want to, and Maisie will keep an eye on things in there and let us know themes that are kind of emerging. So would anybody want to jump in and ask a question? Stuart McDonald, we've got two Stuarts, I think. If you want to unmute yourself.
Hi there. Yeah, the reason I'm here, you probably know, I've been working actively in care homes, entertaining, doing sing-along songs between people with dementia from stage 1 to stage 3. I've been doing that since about 2017. However, what I'm finding now is the homes are cutting back and they're reducing the budgets, and families are now having to pay performers to come in, which I think is dreadful, considering the family's already paying about £1,200 to maybe £2,000 a week. You know, so that's really my kind of gripe. And I have performed, and I have, you know, as I say, the family's quite happy to pay, but I don't think it's right. And that's really why I'm trying now to get funding, where I could then get funding and then do this, because I've got a reputation of doing this for a long time now. But I always feel as if the care homes are left in the back burner. Whereas I've done a wee thing, and I was interested to see Alison's presentation, and it was just on, I looked back on my performances from 2017. I've done about 320 shows, you know, all through that time. And even through COVID, I've done 23 between 2020 and 2021. And it was 23 shows in each, and that was outside windows and whatever, you know. But I just feel as I've built up a good reputation and a repertoire. I love to see the families coming in and seeing their loved ones happy. My own cousin's in a care home. I go and visit her regular. And basically that's why I'm on. But I've been very interested to see the way to do the funding. I found it very hard through COVID to apply to Creative Scotland, but now I can see why and what they're looking for. So yeah, anyway, that's my moan for the day.
No, it's really useful. And maybe, you know, is it useful maybe for Paul, like, could you come in on, and I know that like Luminate do projects in care homes, for example, and it is possible to apply for funding to run a project with a care home and show that partnership maybe in that application.
Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. So we have funded projects and activities in care homes in the past, so could consider applying to us for funding. It was a point actually I didn't really want to go into too much detail in the presentation. I didn't want to cover it because I think it may cause a bit of confusion, but with as Alison will know, so our National Lottery Awards for All programme, we do have a partnership with Creative Scotland, and basically what, in very simple terms, what that means is the focus of your application creative, or is your focus of your application really looking to address a social issue? It might be a mix of two. If it's more creative focused and it's more about developing creative practice, then what will happen is it will come into us, we'll administer it, but then we'll send it off to Creative Scotland for a decision. It will be up to them what they want to fund. If it's more about the social outcome, so it's maybe using just singing or music as a hook, but actually it's targeting and it's supporting people or tackling a specific social issue, then it's probably more for us because it's more community focused. It's less about the arts. And then it will come to us and it will be us making a decision. But actually, it might be somewhere in the middle. At that point, that's for us in Creative Scotland to decide, are you going to take it or are we going to take it? As I said, I was going to cover that in the presentation, but that's probably more for us to worry about rather than you guys to worry about. I think for us, if it's coming to us and it's more about tackling a social issue, I think, yeah, that's fine. You could apply to us. And I think in terms of charging people. That's something that we are less interested in, to be honest. We would rather, if we're funding a project, we would rather, if it's going to be a cost, it's at least minimal, but we would probably prefer that it's free of charge. We do completely understand the need for sustainability. So, for example, a group or an organisation might charge a nominal fee because there's a sustainability element to it, so that they're then less reliant on our funding. That's also a good thing. But if you're delivering a project to your community and it's really supporting vulnerable people, then we want to make sure that there's no barriers and it's affordable for people as well. So we would prefer that either that cost is nominal, very minimal, or it's free of charge as well, free of charge. In terms of Creative Scotland, I actually don't know what Creative Scotland stance on charging is. If you want to charge participants, perhaps Alison knows more than I do on that. But certainly, yeah, from a National Electric Community Fund perspective, it's either free of charge or it's a nominal fee.
Thanks, Paul. We've got a really good question here from Jasmine in the chat. Are there any things to consider when creating a joint application with another organisation? Would any of the speakers want to jump in on that question, and then we'll go to Alison, who's got her hand up.
I'd be happy to make a couple of points about that, because when I've worked with funders that has supported collaborations and joint bids, what I would say is that if it's a very, perhaps a large bid, for anything over a 5-figure sum, do consider having something like a simple memorandum of understanding between the organisations, so that you have something down in paperwork for if things go wrong. So that will give the funder some reassurance. Make sure that there are contacts and details of a lead person from all of the partner organisations, so that the funder can ask, get in touch with them all individually. And it probably is a good idea, and I would say for some funders it's essential that even though it's a consortium or a partnership bid, that there is one organisation that is the lead partner, which will accept the funds and can distribute them. So when I work for a funder, I've seen these things go wrong, but I've also seen them be very successful as well, particularly if there is a larger lead organisation that can accept the funds and distribute them on behalf of the others. But what you're looking to do is to provide reassurance for the funder in terms of their investment, and to keep risks to a minimum. That would be my main advice.
That's brilliant. That's great. Alison, did you have something that you wanted to come in on?
Yeah, I think what Colin said is partly answering what I was going to say to Stuart, which is that I think funders would like to see an application from a constituted organisation before they would like to see it from an individual. So if you are an artist looking to provide work in care homes, like Stuart's suggesting, then who is going to make the application is really important. So it could be the care home, or it could be a group of care homes that you would then work in. But also I can send you an example of a project that was established by the musicians to deliver work with other organisations. It's called the Chain Gang, and they were practice nurses and singers, and they established an organisation to deliver work that supported lung health in lots of different community environments. But they established it as an organisation, and that just opens up all routes to funding, and it makes it much more less risk to the funder, like Colin's suggesting, and so you can, and it's a bit of work to do that, but it opens up this whole route to funding that you don't have as an individual.
We also had a great reflection from Joyce in the chat there, if anybody would like to just have a little read of that. And Alison has just popped that link in there. We will share that afterwards as well. So so we are coming hurtling towards the end of the session. I feel like there's never enough time, but I've just got a couple of things that I will flag before we wrap up. So the Dementia Inclusive Singing Network has a small grants programme which is open just now. And this offers small pots of money to groups or individuals that provide singing activity for people living with dementia, or it might be that you're looking for funding to start a new group that's going to support people living with dementia as well. So Maisie's just popped the slide up there for our contact details, and you can find out about our small grants programme on that link there. Again, we'll share all these links afterwards as well. Another resource that we thought would be useful to flag is from Creative Lives, who have produced a helpful guide to fundraising for community-based creative groups in Scotland. And this offers tips and advice on completing funding applications, as well as an extensive list, or we've already got lots of lists for you to have a look at, but an extensive list of relevant funding opportunities. And so we will share that link with you as well. And lastly, just to say that we are planning to have a little virtual coffee morning towards the end of next month for Singing Network members. So we hope that would just be a chance really just to have a bit of a catch up and a chat. If you've got any questions or you want to just chat about how things are going, we're hoping to do that. And Maisie will obviously share all those details as they emerge via the network and via email. So it's just to say, lastly, thank you so much to Colm, Alison and Paul for their contributions. I'm sure everybody has loads going on in their brain and lots of thoughts now to take away with them. So thank you so much for that. Thanks to Maisie for doing all the tech in the background and making everything run so smoothly. And thanks everybody for coming today. It was really, really good to see you and hear some thoughts. And just be in touch. Really, really looking forward to seeing what happens next for you. So thanks everybody. Take care.